Good morning, it's Emily, your everyday light worker, and I am back for our second part of the sexual harassment series. We're going to have about 16 different parts, and I'm going to walk you through what sexual harassment is, who is responsible for preventing it, how to respond once you are the recipient of sexual harassment. It's going to be an in depth course where we go into all of these questions and answers. So, today, what we're going to focus on is the sexual harassment policy or anti harassment policy. So, according to the Supreme Court, and all of this law is, as we speak, being overwritten. So hopefully this isn't one of the things that's going to be overwritten. But back in, I want to say, the late 80s, the Supreme Court determined that all organizations, all corporations need to have either a sexual harassment policy or an anti-harassment policy. So today we're going to go over what should be included in that policy. Ask that organization for that policy. Every organization pretty much has one. Doesn't mean they follow it. Okay, every organization gets these dictates. They go somewhere and they learn, hey, we're supposed to have a harassment policy. So they go and they write one up, and then that's pretty much the end of it. Real talk. So you're going to get the real deal here. I'm going to tell you how things really work, how they're supposed to work, and how they really work in the real world. So every organization is supposed to have a sexual harassment policy or an anti-harassment policy. So most of them do. They do that much at least. Now, this is a tool because if someone is clearly violating that policy, you have proof. At least you have to collect your proof. Remember, that's the most important thing when we're experiencing sexual harassment is collecting evidence, collecting proof, because without that, without pictures, without notes, without witnesses, it's very much a your word against their word endeavor, and you don't want to get into that. So when you're experiencing it, stay quiet, keep your head down, but make your tapes, get your evidence together, so that when you are ready to speak to someone about it, you have evidence, you have your case, and what you can get, what you want is for the harassment to stop. But if that doesn't happen, if you complain and you get fired, what you want is a monetary settlement for your pain and your distress. So, what a typical anti-harassment corporate policy outlines is the organization's commitment to preventing and addressing harassment, including sexual harassment in the workplace. Such policies are essential tools in creating a safe, respectful, and inclusive work environment. Okay, so that's the party line. That's what an organization is supposed to say. It doesn't mean that's what they're going to do. While the specific wording and details will vary among organizations, a typical anti-harassment corporate policy usually contains the following elements. So this is what you are going to be looking for in your organization's anti-harassment or anti-sexual harassment policy. A policy statement. So the policy statement begins with a clear and unequivocal statement that the organization does not tolerate any form of harassment, including sexual harassment, in the workplace. It emphasizes the commitment to maintaining a harassment-free workplace. And some organizations even use the term zero tolerance. It does not mean that they do not tolerate it. It's just what they're saying. So when you review, one of the first things you want to do when you begin to work at an organization is look at that policy and see what it is saying about harassment, or if it even has a policy. Every organization over 50 people is supposed to have a policy. It doesn't mean that they will. So a lot of organizations are very clearly out of date with these laws that are on the books regarding sexual harassment. Next, you want to take a look at the scope. Once you've gotten through the policy statement, you want to look at the scope. And the policy defines the scope of its application and specifies who it's going to cover. It should cover all employees. It might cover contractors, vendors, clients, and anyone who interacts with the organization in a professional capacity. It might, it doesn't have to. Definitions, the key terms are defined, and so they're going to define sexual harassment. And the purpose is to ensure that there's a shared understanding among employees about what this is, what kind of behaviors are considered harassment. The prohibited conduct. So the policy should list the types of conducts that are prohibited, such as unwelcome sexual advances, offensive comments, any behavior that creates a hostile or intimidating environment. It should tell you how to report if you are experiencing harassment. So the reporting procedures should be in the policy. So these should outline the procedures for reporting incidents of harassment, who you're going to report that to, how to report it, and it should emphasize the importance of prompt reporting. Now, even though the policy says that, trust, when you report, it causes all kinds of waves and ripples in the organization. People, for whatever reason, who harass people at work are shocked. They are stunned when they get reported. I don't know why. It's like you're doing this wrong thing. If someone reports you, you shouldn't be shocked. You shouldn't be stunned. But trust, I've done hundreds of investigations. This is always the reaction. I had no idea I was bothering her. What? You only asked her out 100 times and she said no 100 times. You had no idea you were bothering her. Trust. That's always the response. It's so annoying. I mean, I've done this for years, and so just when you see the same thing day in, day out, year after year, it gets annoying. It's like, come on, dude, really? All right. Confidentiality. Okay, so the policy is going to say that, this report is confidential. We're going to keep it confidential. And if the people who are running the investigation into the complaint truly have integrity, they really are going to try to keep it confidential, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, people are people wherever you go, and people are so interested in this sort of thing. So interested in who is telling on who, and people talk and people want to find out. Investigation has witnesses. Those witnesses are told to be quiet about it. They're not. A lot of times they just, as soon as they get finished getting interviewed, they run around and they tell their colleagues what they were asked. So I'm just letting you know what the real deal is with these types of investigations and what goes on inside workplaces when these investigations are conducted. I know I've conducted hundreds of investigations. But the policy is going to assure employees that your report is going to be handled discreetly to the extent that is permitted by law. It's going to have a non-retaliation clause. And so what this is going to say is that an employee is not going to face retaliation for reporting the harassment, and that organization takes the harassment very seriously. Look at me. Employees are assured that they will not face retaliation for reporting the harassment, and that the organization takes retaliation very seriously as the harassment itself. Okay, so the real deal is that employees who report it are almost always retaliated against. I see, this is another thing that I see over and over and over and over again. People who bring a harassment complaint most times cannot prevail on the harassment complaint because they don't have all of their evidence together. But they will prevail on a retaliation claim because as soon as they report the harassment, they start getting treated differently because people are people and people can be so stupid. And so, you report it. I had this one case where this woman reported that she was being subjected to unwanted sexual advances over and over and over again. And I mean, it was really bad. It was really graphic to the point that her coworker told her to report it to her boss. She's like, this is really bad. You need to report this to your boss. She reports it to her boss. Then suddenly she's not getting any work assignments. She's being treated like a pariah. She's being treated very differently in the organization. And this is with the feds, who should know better. They should know better. They're supposed to take annual training with regard to this. So they should know better. But they don't a lot of times. And they do the stupidest things. So just know that if you are retaliated against, especially if you work in that federal system and you've reported the harassment, then you've got the better complaint of retaliation because that is its own complaint under the federal EEO system. Retaliation for being sexually harassed, retaliation for reporting the complaint is its own basis and its own complaint. So you can say, not only was I sexually harassed, I was retaliated against for reporting the harassment, and that is its own complaint. Um, so, getting back to the policy that the organization should have, the policy should explain what the investigation process is, how the reported incidents are going to be investigated, what the timelines are for the investigations, and what the potential outcomes are. Now, here's something that really pisses off people who report harassment. Say someone is harassing you. Say someone is running around, real case, y'all, real case. Suppose someone is running around sniffing the chairs of people once they get up, along with other crazy stuff. Suppose they're doing that. Um, so the person reports it. There's plenty of evidence that this person is running around sniffing chairs. Lots of witnesses say, yes, this person does this. When the person gets up from the seat, he sniffs their chair. Um, so there's plenty of evidence. The person who has reported it is going to know, well, what is the punishment for the person? Now that is confidential to them, to the person that is being punished or disciplined under the employee guidelines. So there's a lot of frustration when the person who has reported the harassment doesn't know, doesn't have any idea what kind of consequence the investigation has brought about. But if an organization's discipline procedures are intact, if their discipline policy is on point, discipline is going to be confidential. So you cannot, even though you reported it and you want to know that some kind of action has been taken, that's all you're going to hear, that we've investigated and remedial action has been taken. And that is what is required by law. That once an organization is put on notice that someone is running around sniffing chairs, you have to check this person. You have to take some remedial action so that this person knows you can't do this at this organization. That is not acceptable. That is not appropriate. You are putting the organization in jeopardy by running around doing these things that constitute sexual harassment. Stop it. So those conversations are had with the person who is the harasser, usually, if this organization is worth a damn and knows what it's doing. A lot of times people don't know what they're doing. If the person is very high up in the organization, then people become very uncomfortable with bringing discipline against the person because they're afraid of retaliation coming to them. So the people who usually do these investigations are human resources personnel. And human resources personnel does not really have that much power in an organization. Real talk. I'm just being real with you. So what they can do is limited. They're going to do, if you have really dedicated human resources professionals who know the law, they're going to do what they can to make sure that the harasser is dealt with appropriately, but their power is limited. So I'm just being honest with you. Consequences and remedies. This details what the potential consequences for individuals found responsible for harassment, which may include disciplinary actions up to and including termination. So organizations always give themselves that out with regard to any kind of wrongdoing that an employee might be involved in. The organization is always going to say, we're going to take action, disciplinary action against you up to and including termination. It should also, but I don't often see this in many policies, remedies for victims. That's really progressive. If they have that, that's really progressive. So they may offer counseling or protection from future harassment. That's rare. You don't see that in very many policies. Training. So these organizations are supposed to be providing training on a continuous basis. Continuous basis means, like, for sexual harassment, some organizations have such a huge problem with it. They need to train probably every time they have a staff meeting. They need to have a little mini training on sexual harassment. But they don't. And it's a problem. It becomes very pervasive and problematic in that organization. But training, will dampen, if the organization has a problem, doing that training is going to stop it probably for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks after the training is done, you'll see the harassment dampen a bit and people won't be engaging in it. But if it's an organization that has a problem with it, you need to do it consistently and at very short time intervals. Once a year isn't going to cut it if the organization has a problem with it. I'm just being honest. I just know this from being in those kinds of organizations and doing training in those types of organizations. Where there's a problem, the training needs to happen much more consistently. Record keeping. The organization might outline its record keeping procedures related to harassment reports and investigations. It's not likely. These are best practices most organizations don't, to my experience. Legal references. The policy often includes references to relevant federal, state, and local anti-discrimination and harassment laws. Again, that's best practices. You don't typically see that in your typical anti-harassment policy. Compliance with the policies. So employees are informed that they're expected to adhere to the policy, and that might include signing an acknowledgement or receipt of the policy. Just because people sign a policy saying that they've received it, it doesn't mean that they understand it. So that's what employers like to do. That's kind of their cheat sheet to say, hey, all our employees have signed this policy. They're aware. People, when they're getting a job and they're inundated with all those forms, they don't read them. They have no idea what's in the handbook or in the policies. So that doesn't really mean anything, but it's something that organizations do to CYA. Review and updates. The organization commits to periodically reviewing and updating its policy to ensure that it remains effective and up to date. So, that is real best practices. It does not usually happen in most organizations because organizations only have so much time and they're just not going to be reviewing their policies. There should be a statement of commitment, and that's important. So that is a statement from senior leadership that demonstrates that it is committed to a harassment-free workplace. So something like a statement from the president, a letter from the president or the CEO saying, hey, in this organization, we do not abide by any kind of harassment of any type. So this anti-harassment corporate policy is a powerful tool in preventing sexual harassment in the workplace for several reasons. It establishes expectations. It creates awareness. It provides a reporting mechanism. It puts a deterrent in place. It shows that the organization is in legal compliance, and it also shows that there is a cultural shift within the organization, promoting a culture of respect, inclusion, and accountability. However, please know that organizations like to draft these policies and say that, hey, we've done what we're supposed to do. We've drafted the policy. It takes a lot more than that to make sure that the policy is enforced. So the fact that your organization has a sexual harassment policy or anti-harassment policy or an anti-sexual harassment policy is a good first step, but it does not mean, not by any means, that this is an organization that is in compliance with the EEO, the federal EEO laws. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. I wish I had better news for you, but that's not what it means. And it doesn't mean that the organization is one where there is no harassment. Even if they're saying zero tolerance, that's just a piece of paper. How people behave and how people act is dependent upon what is allowed day to day within the organization. So stay alert. Be aware that the organization should have a policy. If you believe you're being subjected to that, review the policy and make sure that you know the policy and make sure that you are recording any violations of the policy. And this is how you protect yourself. Okay? Next up, we're going to talk about the different types of sexual harassment. Okay? All right. I hope this helps. Emily signing off.